The purpose of today's video is to give photographers an idea of what to expect when flying blind into Paris Fashion Week. Because that's what I did, and I'm going to share my experience with you. I went into Paris Fashion Week as a freelancer, meaning nobody reached out to me and offered me money to fly there or anything like that. I went there completely on my own dime, and all of the shoots and shows that I booked while I was there were completely the result of hard work and hustle. In this video, I am going to tell you what I did to get these opportunities, what I learned from previous experiences at different fashion weeks, and what I learned from my time in Paris. If you watched my New York Fashion Week video, then you'll be familiar with the format of this one, although I'm going to try to truncate it a little bit more than I did in the New York Fashion Week video, and I'm not going to focus so much on my day-to-day experience and more on the process by which I got gigs and booked shows and basically made my schedule while I was in Paris. I'm going to talk about the groundwork and planning that went into preparing for this trip, as well as how things went once we got there and what I learned for next time. So if you are a photographer and you are planning to go to a fashion week abroad at some point and you're interested to know what to expect, then this video will be a good one for you. Without further ado, let's jump right in. Last September, when I went to New York Fashion Week, my main regret was doing it solo. And so that was the first thing that I rectified this time. The hostel that I booked in New York was more expensive because I was staying on my own and I had booked a private room. And I quickly learned that it would have been a much better idea to team up with one or two other people and split a room that could be then closer to the city center for a similar price. So for Paris, that is exactly what I did. Enter Nick Scott. He is my fellow photographer, and he is somebody that I've worked and collaborated with extensively on creative and business shoots alike. He runs his own company, Ampleur Creative, and he speaks French proficiently, which is more than I can say for myself. So when it comes to reliable people who I can trust to actually follow through with extensive travel plans like this, Nick was definitely at the top of the list. When I mentioned the possibility of my going to Paris Fashion Week, he was pretty keen on the idea of coming along. And after a few phone calls discussing the details of the trip and going in depth on the possibility, we decided to book tickets. I booked a double room in a hostel that was a 10-minute train ride from the area where most of the shows were being held. The accommodations were a similar price per person to what I had paid in New York, but we were much closer and it was a much nicer hostel. Score one for traveling with a buddy. So once we had our flights and hostel booked, we had to get down to business with outreach. Now, outreach would wind up being quite a challenge. What I mean by outreach is like lead generation. So going through web pages, finding contacts, sending emails, portfolios, pricing, blah, blah, blah. My experience with outreach for New York Fashion Week had been fairly straightforward. Google a few keywords, make a spreadsheet, put in designers, models, makeup artists, influencers, etc., and then send out emails and profit. With Paris, however, none of the terms that I put into Google were on the pages of the websites that I was looking for because they were in French. So of course, all of the searching and all of the lead gen had to be done in French. Google can translate keywords and web pages. It's possible, but it is a lot more of a slog than it was for New York Fashion Week because of that difference in language. See, a lot of like lead gen for this kind of thing is, Googling keywords, finding articles, reading about past events, looking through the list of people who have liked or commented on posts, finding people tagged in certain posts, mentioned in certain posts, etc., etc., etc. There's a lot of like detective work almost, and that is a lot more difficult when you have to translate about 50% of it. All of this difficulty with translations and mucking about web pages and search results, blah, 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 all of this was done in addition to the parts of outreach that are usually time-consuming anyways. And for me, the most time-consuming part of outreach typically is picking photos from my portfolio that are relevant to the contact who I'm reaching out to show them that I can take photos that would complement their brand or aesthetic. It was a slog. It was a lot. And it was totally worthwhile in the end. Just kidding. No, it wasn't. The response we got was absolutely dismal. Like, terrible. Between the two of us, between me and Nick, over the course of a month and a half, we probably reached out to about 90 contacts. So all of this work 90 times over. We reached out to English contacts and French contacts, people in London, people in Milan, Parisians, designers, models, influencers, agents, show organizers, everybody we could find. We tried a few different outreach templates. We tried entirely personalized ones with prices, ones without, ones with availability, with packages, with details, with specials, all of the marketing tricks that we know. And both Nick and I run our own businesses, so we do know a fair few marketing tricks, and we got nothing. We got nothing. So, a learning experience for me. And probably a pretty good piece of advice for you, if you are a photographer who's considering flying to Paris for Fashion Week, is that if you don't already have contacts who are going to Paris, or really any fashion week that operates in a language that you don't speak, my advice is to stick to events that are closer to home until you're able to build up those contacts. So network with your local fashion community, get to know the people there, and then chances are, if you're in a big enough city, some of the people from your local community will be flying to Paris for Fashion Week. And then you've got contacts there. Get to know the people closer to home first. So if you're on this side of the pond, go to New York Fashion Week, go to LA Fashion Week, go to even Vancouver Fashion Week, go to fashion weeks that speak your language, which I'm assuming is English if you're watching this, where you can comfortably network and get to know those contacts. Because what saved me in the end and actually made my trip worthwhile and got me some gigs and things to do while I was in Paris was my personal network of contacts here in Vancouver that I have built up over the years working at Vancouver Fashion Week. After realizing that Nick and I were getting nowhere fast with our French outreach endeavor, I plumbed my own personal network for leads. And when I say I plumbed my network, I mean I absolutely wrung every last drop out of my network. I reached out to all of the Vancouver-based fashion-friendly folks who I knew. Models, designers, show organizers, influencers, agencies, friends and colleagues, anybody who might have a reason to go over to Paris for Fashion Week. And finally, I did get some leads. So, the trip. Nick and I did try to coordinate our gear packing so that we wouldn't double up on things like light stands and tripods, but I was maybe a little too obstinate about bringing all of my own gear because I am comfortable with this exact gear, and I wound up severely overpacking anyways. So we show up at the airport bright and early in the morning, and I have my large suitcase packed with 3 softboxes, 2 light stands, 2 strobe heads, and way too many fashionable outfits. I also packed a heated blanket and painkillers, which is not something that I brought to New York, but which I have since learned is an absolute necessity for Fashion Week events, and I will not be told otherwise. The first 2 days after landing in Paris, we spent exploring the city, being tourists, and also scoping locations. So when you see a location that is interesting, you gotta take a photo of it on your phone, because that then saves the location data in that image and you can reference it later. And so by the time day 3 came around, we had our first shoot, we already had some great locations picked out. After that, Nick and I decided to check out some shows. And here is the first piece of like insider information that I can give you. There is a TikTok account called PFW Addresses that posts the addresses for all the major shows at midnight each day. I don't know if this is a thing every season, but it was a thing this season and it was incredibly useful. One of my main regrets in New York was that I didn't get to go to any major shows because the address info isn't made public until after they happen. And these are shows like Fendi and Balenciaga and Valentino and Louis Vuitton. Shows that lots of celebrities and famous people turn up to, so it makes sense that they're not advertising the addresses because then they'd get mobbed by photographers. So of course, even with the address, we can't get into these big shows. We are not nearly important enough. But it was well worth our while to turn up to these shows just to capture the scene outside of them. Over the course of the week, we went to the Schiaparelli show, Victoria Beckham, Vivienne Westwood, and Alexander McQueen, and we tried to go for Balenciaga and Rick Owens, but we missed those, unfortunately. At these shows, there's a few interesting things that happen. Firstly, designers will send large groups of people dressed in their designs to go and stand around and be photographed. So this results in large ensemble collections on display, street style. Secondly, people will dress up in crazy, over-the-top outfits inspired by the designer who's showing. This was particularly cool at the Vivienne Westwood show, where everybody wore these super punk Vivienne Westwood inspired outfits. The street style was incroyable. Thirdly, people will dress up in like these over-the-top, eye-catching outfits in order to promote themselves as a designer, model, musician, artist, whatever. So their goal is to be photographed by as many people as possible and then network with the people who photograph them. And they'll hand out business cards and QR codes and things. I got a ton of business cards and Instagram mutuals from these interactions, which was a pretty cool way to get connections in Paris, and now next time I go there, I know a few super creative artistic people who are really interested in fashion who I can possibly reach out to. Finally, the last cool thing about these shows, other than the street style opportunities, is that there is an opportunity to play paparazzi. At the beginning and end of each show, there'll be this long line of hire cars and limos lined up outside the gates where there's like a crowd, and then there's like a walkway, and then there's the gate to the venue, and celebrities will be rushed in and out of the door. Some will stop and interact with their fans, take pictures, give autographs, and others will just head inside as quickly as possible. So typically I have no interest in being a paparazzo, but given the opportunity, like I have my camera and my flash and a bunch of celebrities right in front of me, yeah, I was interested to try my hand. I was also surprised by how many female photographers were doing this, at least in Paris, because I think we usually think of paparazzi as being fairly male-dominated, and like, I think it was still majority men, but there was a lot of women who were doing it too, which was interesting, and I guess I was one of them. Celebrities that I got blurry, terrible photos of include Elle Fanning, Jared Leto, and Jean-Paul Gaultier. I also got decent shots of India Moore and Ronaldo the footballer. That's it though, because I'm pretty terrible at being a paparazzo. I am too short, and I didn't bring the little stool thing that everybody else had. So, aside from these big shows, Nick and I also had booked a few smaller shows that we had press passes for. Now these shows are usually not on the Fashion Week calendar, so when you look up like Paris Fashion Week calendar, on that calendar it's all just the big shows, the ones that I was just talking about. And the smaller shows, the ones that you can actually conceivably get into, are not listed, which does make it quite a bit harder to find them. We only booked one show ahead of time, and it was the GFC show, which is the same one that I went to in New York, and it's run by the same people who do Vancouver Fashion Week. So a lot of the people from Vancouver who were in Paris for Fashion Week were working on that GFC show. We got press passes to that, as well as other photographers that I knew, and when we were at that show, we had an opportunity to network with other photographers in the press pit, which is how we found out about the other two shows that we booked. The next day, we were invited to this show, which I don't know what it was called, but the designer we were shooting for was Coco Creations. The final show we were also invited to was by far the fanciest, and it was run by Fashion Week Studio, and it was held in this opulent venue at Place Vendôme. The looks at this show were absolutely incredible, and it was by far my favorite set of designers out of any show that I shot that week. Unfortunately, the lighting in the venue was very difficult to color balance, so my photos are like kind of mid, but whatever. In addition to these shows, Nick and I had booked 5 other photo shoots scattered throughout the time we were there, I think all of which were with local Vancouver models and creators. So once again, having a network built up before you go is extremely useful and probably necessary. All of my shoots were outside, so I actually wound up carting around my entire lighting kit with the stands and softboxes and the strobes for like kilometers and kilometers a day, which that's why I brought the heated blanket. We got into this flow of making a tentative plan with each other each day of like what things we were booked for, what things we really wanted to do, and then leaving time open in between those things to basically be spontaneous and say yes to things that we were invited to. Probably my final bit of advice is talk to strangers and say yes. Because this is something that I didn't really leave time for in New York. You know, if you watch the video, you know I was pretty much booked solid the entire week, and I was absolutely run ragged and exhausted. So even when I did have spare time, I was too tired to do anything with it other than sit and edit photos. In Paris, however, we only booked like 1 or 2 things per day, and so we had a lot more time to be spontaneous and go out of our way to do things that we were invited to do. My advice to you is always say yes to after parties and dinners and club events and cocktail parties and any kind of social event that you get invited to, because that is where the networking actually happens at Fashion Week. So leave time and energy for that. My last bit of advice. Anyways, yeah, that is my experience at Paris Fashion Week. There's a lot more stuff that I could talk about, but those are like my main takeaways, I think, and things that I would recommend to people planning to go themselves. If you are interested in Fashion Week and you found this video helpful, let me know down in the comments. If you want to know more, you can also ask a question. I'm very responsive in the comments. I try to answer pretty much all of them, and I will see you guys next week with a film-related video, I think. I'm going to be reviewing one of the film stocks that I bought in Paris and tested in Barcelona. So stay tuned for that. Thank you guys again for watching. I will see you soon. In the meantime, I want you to stay sharp and don't forget to keep shooting. Bye guys. Or should I say, au revoir.